What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the basement. Toolbox, Bert, Nathan, Cocker Stuff. Everybody's here. So what we're going to do tonight, we're going to talk about lower tube internals. So this is something that was requested in a Facebook group, and I'm going to do the best I can to answer the questions that this gentleman had, and hopefully I can answer them in a decent enough fashion without being too incredibly vague. Because they are some kind of tough questions. Well, a couple of them are some kind of tough questions to answer, really. So, like I said, we're going to talk about lower tube internals. Everybody has their preference. Everybody has their secret recipe. But the biggest thing is that everyone's preference and everyone's secret recipe relates directly to how they like their individual builds to feel and operate and the level of efficiency and whatnot coming from these builds. So that's really what it boils down to. First and foremost, everyone's secret formula, everyone's favorite recipe for their lower tube is all about their individual preference. Okay, these are autocockers we're talking about. Everyone has a personal preference. Everyone has likes something completely different in these markers. What shoots good to me may not feel good to you, and that's just the way it is. So the first question that was asked was, who makes the best lower tube kit? Okay, so if we're talking about just a full drop-in kit, okay, one, there is no best. Best is so subjective. Again, we're working with autocockers. So it's all about what feels good to you. Now, that being said, as far as the best drop-in whole lower tube kit, CCM makes a fantastic one. It's a really good balance of both spring tension and efficiency as far as the operation range. For the pressure input, it is a really nice feeling lower tube kit. I've used some ShockTech stuff that I've had really good luck with. You guys know I'm a huge fan of stock WGP stuff, both springs, valve, hammer. It's a really good operating range as far as pressure. It makes for a good balance of efficiency and shot performance and sound signature. And I mean, it's the original recipe, 11 herbs and spices of the autococker. I mean, it just worked. Okay. That being said, I mean, I've used a little bit of everyone's stuff, and with the right combination and a pack of Madman springs to help sort out the details along the way, there are a lot of really good lower tube kits out there. It's all about finding what you like and what fits your application. Because even though, like I said, CCM makes a fantastic lower tube kit, if I'm trying to build a vertical stock class pump, and I'm probably not going to grab a CCM kit. Now, that being said, I haven't tried building a CCM lower tube into a stock class pump. It may work wonderfully, but more than likely I'm going to try springing that for a much higher pressure than is going to be in the operating range for a CCM kit, because it does tend to be a lower operating pressure kit, given that it has softer springs. So like I said, kind of subjective. Best lower tube is all up to you. I've had good luck with ShockTech and the rat valves, the fat hammers. I don't know that I've run any ShockTech specific springs. I don't remember if they make them. I know they used to do their own spring kits. I don't know if they still are. There's also like the SLPS spring kits from, I believe it's Maggot out there. Anyway, there's a lot of really good options. If you're looking for a good drop-in and go kit, CCM does make a good one. There's just lots of really good options. CCM just happens to be the one that I've used most recently and had really good luck with. Okay, so second question was how to tell if your springs need replaced. Okay, so this is kind of a two-way thing. One, if springs have been over-compressed, or if they have been left in like a very moist environment and the marker's been cocked, something like that, yeah, you can have some springs that some of the compression dies out on them, but that's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily mean that they need replaced. Unless they are snapped or they are the wrong spring tension in general, they probably don't need replaced. I mentioned in one of my building videos that whenever I put together a marker, depending on what kind of spring I'm using, if I'm using a totally stock WGP lower tube, for example, and when you're putting that all in and you drop your hammer into the lower tube and set your lug so it's not moving around, when you put that hammer spring in, I have always had better luck when the hammer is sitting forward against the face of the valve and there's no tension whatsoever on any of it. If that hammer spring is not almost flush with the back of the body before you install the IVG, I will typically stretch that hammer spring a little bit, which is going to strengthen the tension in that spring and elongate it a bit. Now this, I've always had better luck doing this. It goes ahead and kind of preloads that spring, gives you a bit of tension. That's why you see a lot of guys talking about when you're sweet spotting, you need to have your IVG about 2 turns in. Not necessarily, you don't really have to, you just need to have the correct spring tension or preload in that spring. So as far as springs needing replaced, it's going to come down to, like I said, if it is completely rusted and snapped, or if it is the complete wrong application. Like I said, for example, with the vertical stock class and the CCM kit, if I'm trying to run something on 850 psi or 950 psi input, it may not be the best idea to put really nice soft springs in it. It's going to have a really nice pump stroke because of the soft hammer spring, but it's not going to have enough tension, more than likely, to open that valve enough for me to get the velocity out that I need. Now that being said, I could be wrong. I haven't tried it, but I might have to now. So third question kind of ties back into the second question. How does spring stiffness relate to your application? This is the bottom line for really all 3 of these questions. Is it totally depends. Like it relates in every point of that question is where your spring tension is going to relate. Okay, like I said, if I'm trying to run a very high pressure, very efficient build, I may be running, let's say, a standard WGP brass valve with a blue valve spring on it, okay, because I have a massive amount of input pressure and don't need quite as much spring pressure on there. You could probably run a red valve spring, but you might not need to. So for example, let's say 850, 950 psi input from unregulated CO2, let's say a blue medium strength valve spring on the stock WGP brass valve, let's say a stock WGP hammer, and say a red Madman hammer spring. So that equation should balance out because you do have higher input pressure, medium spring on the valve, and then with a relatively standard hammer as far as weight goes. So it's not a heavy hammer. We're not running a Shock Tech Fat or an ID or a CCM hammer or anything like that. Standard hammer and then a strong valve or a strong hammer spring. That equation should balance out. Now here is where spring stiffness relates to that equation. If I put that all together and I still can't get it to sweet spot correctly, and I can't achieve my velocity correctly and with the least amount of effort without maxing out my springs, that's my problem, is probably my springing or my hammer, okay? That is where it relates to your application. In one point, is that whatever you're trying to get out of that build or whatever trouble you're having with that build, you probably can achieve a lot of difference just by switching out springs. Now, how else does it relate to the equation, again, or to the application? A lot of it depends on what you want out of the build as far as feel. For example, one of my favorite setups, even on a stock WGP lower tube, is to swap out those springs with a set of double blue Madmans. I like the tension of them. They are a nice bouncy spring, but it's a nice softish hammer spring. It feels good to me, okay, especially in a mechanical marker. That's one of my favorite lower tube setups, just because I like the feel of it. Now if you put something together and you absolutely hate the feel of it, if you have to run your LPR very high up because you have so much force that you have to overcome with that hammer spring, then it might be a good idea to change something around on the other side of that lower tube equation so that you can make it cycle with a little less pressure by running a softer hammer spring in it. So you'll have to change the other side of the equation in order to be able to compensate for that, okay? So it's, like I said, spring stiffness really relates across the board in both feel, performance, and application as far as what's going on in your lower tube marker, in the lower tube of your marker. So that being said, as a general rule, And this is definitely not across the board. Okay, this is just a good guideline to go by for most things. There are obvious exceptions. Okay, but in general, higher pressure, higher efficiency. Lower pressure, lower efficiency, but it's going to be a little softer. It's going to have a softer sound signature, and you're going to be able to run softer springs in a lower pressure build, so it's going to cycle a lot smoother. Okay. Now that being said, yes, there are a bunch of different applications with this. There's a bunch of exceptions. I mean, especially like in the world of Bob Long, for example, we don't know what the hell happens. It's just low pressure goes in, magic happens, and then efficiency comes out the other side, and it's really nice, smooth, well done stuff. So it, in general, that's an equation you can start with. Okay, high pressure, high efficiency, if set up correctly. Low pressure, low efficiency can be pretty efficient if you set it up correctly. So it all depends on the spring balances. That being said, grab a bunch of parts, grab a bunch of different lower tube stuff, try everything out there. Don't buy something just because someone tells you to. There are some good products out there, but everyone has their own brand allegiance and everyone has their own things that they like that you might not. That being said, don't take empirical evidence at face value. When somebody says, "Oh, well, just do this," I mean, yeah, they may have the experience behind it, but unless they can actually back it up by telling you why it works, then it's just another opinion. So that being said, grab everything you can, try everything you can, support your companies, and figure out what you actually like about each individual product and what you don't like about each individual product. We have a ton of parts to work with nowadays, so grab a bunch of spring kits, grab a bunch of lower internals, throw some crap together, figure out what's going on. Okay, it takes some practice, but you will learn the equation of how to make your lower tube work the way you want it to. Okay, so I hope that somewhat explained a little bit of, or somewhat answered the questions that were posed. And if not, let me know. I'll be more than happy to try to be either a little more specific or explain a little bit better, or whatever it is that you guys need from me. So one more thing, got some really cool stuff wrapping up. Had a bunch of stuff just went out the door last week. Got 2 more out the door, going out the door this week. And then I've got another one back behind me that I got to grab some hardware for, and that'll be a carny out the door, hopefully this week, maybe next week. If any of you guys are going to Living Legends here in 2019, let me know. This is going to be my first year going. I'm really excited to go. I've wanted to go for years. I don't know if I'll be doing any tech work. I do know I plan on drinking a lot of beer and hopefully meeting some of you guys out there. So if you guys are going to be headed out, let me know. I'd love to meet you. It'll be really, really cool. We'll shake hands. I'll grab you a beer, and hopefully it'll be a good time. And who knows, I might shoot you in the face. So, that being said, we'll talk to you guys next time.